Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Storytime with Uncle Monkey. I am your Uncle Monkey. Today's story is called The Haunted House. One time, a preacher went to see if he could put a haunt to rest in a house in his settlement. The house had been haunted for about 10 years. Several people had tried to stay there all night, but they would always get scared out by the haunt. So this preacher took his Bible and went to the house, went on in, built himself a good fire, and lit a lamp. He sat down and read the Bible. Then just before midnight, he heard something. Something start in the cellar. It sounded like somebody was trying to scream. Got choked off. Then there was a lot of thrashing around and struggling, and finally, everything got
quiet.
The old preacher took up his Bible again, but before he could start reading, he heard footsteps coming up the cellar stairs. He sat watching the door to the cellar, and the footsteps kept coming closer and closer. He saw the doorknob turn, and when the door began to open, he jumped up and hollered, "What do you want?" The door shut back easy-like, and there wasn't a sound. The preacher was trembling a little, but he finally opened the Bible and read a while. Then he got up and laid the book on the chair and went to mending the fire. Then the haunt started walking again, and step, 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 up the cellar stairs. The old preacher sat watching the door, saw the doorknob turn, and the door open. The haunt looked like a young woman. He backed up and said, "Who are you? What do you want?" Then the haunt sort of swayed, like she didn't know what to do. Then she just faded out. The old preacher waited, and when he didn't hear any more noises, he went over and shut the door. He was sweating and trembling all over, but he was a brave man, and he thought he'd be able to see it through. So he turned his chair where he'd be able to see the cellar door, and he sat down, and he waited. It wasn't long before he heard the haunt start up again, slowly, step, 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 closer and closer, step, step, and it was right at the door. The preacher stood up and held his Bible out before him to protect him. Then the knob slowly turned, and the door opened. This time, the preacher spoke in a quiet-like voice. He said, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, who are you, and what do you want?" The haunt came right across the room, straight to him, and took hold of his coat. It was a young woman, about 20 years old. Her hair was torn and tangled, and the flesh was dropping off her face so he could see the bones and part of her teeth. She had no eyeballs, but there was a sort of blue light in the sockets, and she had no nose on her face. Then she started talking. It sounded like her voice was coming and going, with the wind blowing it. She told how her lover had killed her for her money and buried her in the cellar. She said if the preacher would dig up her bones and bury her properly, she could finally rest in peace. Then she told him to take the end joint of her little finger and put it in the collection plate that weekend at church. He'd find out who had murdered her if he did as she said. And then she said, "If you come back here once more after that, you'll hear my voice at midnight, and I'll tell you where the money is hid, and you can use it for your church." The haunt sobbed like she was tired, and she sunk down toward the floor and was gone. The preacher found her bones in the cellar and buried them in the graveyard that very night. When Sunday came, the preacher put the finger bone in the collection plate, and when a certain man happened to touch it, it stuck to his hand. The man jumped up and rubbed and scraped and tore at that bone, trying to get it off. He was screaming. He was going crazy, but he couldn't get it off. Finally, he confessed to the murder, and the bone fell off, and they took him to the jail. After the man was hanged for murder, the preacher went back to that house one midnight, just as the haunt had instructed, and the haunt's voice told him to dig under the hearthrug. The preacher did, and he found a big sack of money. And where that haunt had held on to his coat, the print of those bony fingers was burned right into the cloth. It never came